The wind off the Mediterranean was cold for May, a raw, damp chill that clawed through the fine wool of Ari Levinson's suit jacket. It was a predator's wind, carrying the ancient, briny stench of the sea. But tonight that familiar smell was corrupted by an unholy choir of others. There was the acrid perfume of high explosives, a sharp, chemical tang that burned the nostrils. There was the chalky, silicate dust of pulverized concrete that coated his tongue like a foul medicine. And beneath it all, something else. Something sickeningly sweet and utterly profane. It was the smell that clung to the back of the throat, a coppery, metallic tang that tasted of burnt sugar, atomized steel, and vaporized life. Ari knelt, the fine gray dust of what had been, an hour ago, the bustling Café Verde settling onto the knees of his charcoal trousers. It coated his expensive Italian leather shoes, a profane sacrament of destruction. The streetlights of Dizengoff, usually so cheerful and inviting, now cast long, dancing shadows through the settling haze, illuminating a Hieronymus Bosch tableau of devastation. Overturned tables, their metal legs twisted into grotesque shapes. Shattered glass glittering like malevolent diamonds in the emergency strobes. And the stark, white sheets of the Zaka volunteers, moving with a grim, practiced reverence to cover the dead, preserving their dignity in the face of ultimate violation. A single, overturned espresso cup lay near his hand, its porcelain chipped, a small pool of dark liquid congealing with the dust into a muddy paste. He didn't need the preliminary report the frantic Shin Bet liaison was shouting into his phone a few meters away, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and grief. He didn't need the forensic teams in their white Tyvek suits, moving with the methodical, reverent grace of priests as they carefully bagged fragments of metal and flesh. Ari Levinson knew the signature, the way a connoisseur knows the vintage of a rare wine by its bouquet alone. This was the work of Omar Al-Jamil, the ghost. Al-Jamil was an artist of chaos whose medium was hexamine and peroxide, a refined TATP compound he had somehow stabilized with a proprietary catalyst, a feat that baffled the best chemists in Mossad and the CIA. He packed it not into crude pipe bombs or conspicuous vests, but into elegant, almost undetectable devices. A laptop left under a table, a briefcase forgotten on a bench. And they always left behind this unique, horrifying afterscent. The ghost of incinerated caramel from the cafe's signature pastries, mingling with a specific chemical residue of the blast. Ari had come to call it the smell of caramel death. 3 years. For 3 excruciating years, a file thick with conjecture and thin on hard facts had been the central, malevolent object of Ari's existence. 3 years of hunting this phantom across the fractured, sun-bleached landscape of the Middle East. Al-Jamil would surface, orchestrate a masterpiece of terror like this one. A sidewalk cafe on a beautiful evening. The peak of the after-work rush. 14 dead, dozens maimed, a nation's brief, fragile sense of peace shattered. And then, just as quickly, he would vanish. He dissolved back into the teeming shadows of the Levant, leaving nothing behind but corpses and questions. He left no digital trail, no boastful videos for Al Jazeera, no reliable chatter for the savants in Unit 8200 to intercept and decode. He was a whisper in the static, a hypothesis with a body count that grew with each passing season. Ari ran a gloved finger over a shard of twisted, pink-painted metal embedded in the pockmarked stucco wall of a bookstore across the street. The heat of the blast had fused it into the wall like a modern art sculpture. It wasn't part of the bomb casing. It was from a baby stroller. He saw it in his mind's eye with a sickening, high-definition clarity. A young mother, maybe her first child, enjoying the cool evening air, the taste of coffee, the simple, profound joy of a normal day. An image flashed, unbidden and unwelcome, of his own niece, 7-year-old Tamar. Her infectious laughter as he pushed her on a swing in a park in Ramat Gan, not 5 kilometers from here. He squeezed his eyes shut, the muscles in his jaw bunching into knots of granite. He forced the image away, shoving it violently into the cold, locked box in his mind where he kept such things, the emotional shrapnel of his profession. He replaced it with the hard, sharp calculus of the mission. The ghost had made his move, signed his name in blood and fire on the heart of Tel Aviv. Now it was their turn. The drive north was a silent, grim procession. Back in the sterile, subterranean quiet of the Mossad headquarters, known to its denizens only as the pit. The air was thick with the hum of servers and the low, constant murmur of analysts processing the flood of incoming data. The office of Eitan El-Baz, the grizzled head of the Caesarea department, was an island of analog defiance in a digital sea. It smelled of stale cigar smoke, old paper, and potent black coffee brewed in a percolator that looked older than the state itself. Eitan looked like he had been carved from the same stone as the Judean hills, all sharp angles and deep-set, weary eyes that had seen too much history. The smoke from his unfiltered cigarette, a cheap, throat-rasping local brand called Time, curled around his head like a shroud. The file on Omar al-Jamil was projected onto a wall-sized smart screen. It was an insult to the 14 people who had just died. Mostly conjecture, conflicting reports from unreliable assets, and grainy satellite photos of men in crowded souks who might be him. But they had one piece of confirmed, actionable intelligence. A single, hard-won vulnerability, bought with the blood of a brave Sayeret Matkal team 2 years prior. In a botched killer capture raid on a suspected bomb factory in a Jenin basement, Al-Jamil had escaped through a pre-planned tunnel system. But he hadn't escaped whole. He'd left behind his lower left leg, severed just below the knee by shrapnel from his own defensive booby trap. A Russian F-1 fragmentation grenade that had killed 2 of Israel's finest soldiers, Yoni and Gavriel. Ari had known them both, had shared a bottle of Arak with them at a wedding just 6 months before the raid. "He's a ghost with a limp," Eitan said, his voice a low rasp, like gravel being ground in a cement mixer. He took a long drag from his cigarette, the orange tip glowing like a malevolent eye in the dim light of the office. "And a ghost with a limp needs a prosthetic. A man like him, a perfectionist, an engineer of death. He won't settle for a wooden peg from a back-alley butcher. He'll want the best." This was the genesis of Operation Nightingale. Not a reference to the songbird, but to Florence Nightingale, the lady with the lamp. They would be the lamp, a beacon designed to illuminate the ghost's every step. The plan was audacious, bordering on clinically insane, the kind of high-risk, high-reward gambit that was Caesarea's specialty. They weren't going to put a tracker on his car, or in his burner phone, or on a person in his orbit. They were going to put the tracker inside his body, or as close as they could possibly get. They were going to bug his leg. The first monumental hurdle was identifying the source of the prosthetic. Al-Jamil was far too paranoid for a clinic in Damascus or a shady medical supplier in Tehran. Financial intelligence, painstakingly gathered by a dedicated team in the Kedan unit, tracing ghost accounts and hawala transfers through a labyrinth of international banking, pointed to a single, high-end prosthetics clinic in Beirut. It was run by a Dr. Elias Haddad, a Lebanese Maronite Christian who had been educated at Heidelberg University in Germany. He was renowned for his skill with advanced myoelectric and carbon fiber limbs. More importantly, intelligence confirmed that Haddad sourced all his high-end components directly from one specific manufacturer, a world-class firm named Otto Bach, headquartered in Stuttgart. The second, more delicate hurdle was the asset. Dr. Haddad was not a potential informant. He was a civilian, a healer, a man who dedicated his life to restoring mobility to the maimed. Turning him was Ari's job. Ari didn't fly to Beirut with a bag of cash or a silenced Beretta PX-4 Storm. He flew with a medical file. It was the file of Layla Haddad, the doctor's 8-year-old daughter. She was suffering from a rare congenital heart defect, a severe case of aortic valve stenosis. The experimental transcatheter aortic valve replacement she needed was available in only 2 places on Earth: Johns Hopkins in the United States and Sheba Medical Center, just outside Tel Aviv. The international waiting list was years long, a death sentence for a child whose heart was already failing. Unless, of course, one had a benefactor, a friend who could pull some very powerful strings. They met in a quiet, shaded courtyard of an Armenian cafe in the Burj Hamid district of Beirut. The air smelled of strong Turkish coffee, cardamom, and the sweet, fruity smoke from a nearby nargile pipe. Ari, looking every bit the anonymous European medical consultant in a lightweight linen suit and carrying a well-worn leather briefcase, watched Haddad approach. The doctor was a man stooped by worry, his face etched with the sleepless nights of a father watching his child fade before his eyes. Ari didn't waste time with pleasantries. He slid the file across the wrought iron table. He didn't speak of espionage or terror, of Mossad or Omar al-Jamil. He spoke of ejection fractions and pediatric cardiology. He spoke of a world-renowned surgeon at Sheba, Dr. Feinberg, who had pioneered the exact procedure Layla needed. Haddad's hands trembled as he opened the folder. Inside was not just a summary, but a detailed surgical plan, a letter of admission to Sheba's pediatric cardiac wing, Feinberg's personal signature at the bottom. It was a miracle presented on a cafe table. Who are you?" he whispered, his eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of hope and dread. "I'm the man who can get your daughter to the front of the line," Ari said softly, his voice a calm, reassuring anchor in the doctor's swirling sea of panic. "The surgery, the post-operative care, a full recovery, a new life for her. We will take care of everything." In exchange for what? The doctor's voice was barely audible, the question he was terrified to ask. "A fitting," Ari replied, stirring a sugar cube into his espresso. The clink of the spoon against the porcelain, the only sound between them for a long moment. "One of your clients, a man you know as Mr. Salim, will soon need a replacement for his prosthesis. The socket is likely wearing out, causing him discomfort. We need you to convince him it's time for an upgrade to the latest model. When the new limb arrives from Germany, you will fit him with it. That is all." Haddad's face went corpse pale. He knew exactly who Mr. Salim was. A quiet, intense man who paid in crisp, undeclared US dollars and was always flanked by 2 hulking shadows who watched every single move the doctor made. The man whose file was a blank, his address a post office box in Cyprus. He was Omar al-Jamil. "You want me to... What are you putting inside it?" "You don't need to know the mechanics of the miracle, doctor," Ari said, his tone hardening just enough to cut through the man's fear. "You only need to accept that it's happening. All you need to know is the difference between the sound of your daughter's laughter and the sound of a heart monitor flatlining. You will make the call. You will schedule the appointment. You will do the fitting. And then you will forget this conversation, this café, my face. You will go to America with your daughter and watch her grow up. It's that simple. Haddad stared into his coffee cup, seeing not his own reflection, but the pale, tired face of his ailing daughter. He was a good man trapped in an impossible, monstrous choice. He nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path through the condensation on his water glass and dripping onto the table. The asset was in place. The price was paid. The core of Operation Nightingale was not the doctor, but the device. Back in a shielded, windowless lab deep within the Glylit intelligence complex, a tech wizard named Gad, a young man who looked like he should be in a university library, not designing spycraft for assassins, presented the Might 4 to Ari. It was no bigger than a grain of rice, a marvel of miniaturization that represented the pinnacle of Mossad's technological prowess. Standard GPS is out, Gad explained, his hands dancing over a holographic display that floated in the air between them. The power drain is too high, the battery requirement too large, and the continuous signal is a lighthouse for any decent counter-surveillance sweep. Al-Jamil would find it in an hour. The Might is different. He magnified the image. The tiny speck resolved into a complex lattice of circuits, processors, and what looked like a coiled spring. This is a location beacon, but it operates on a sleep and burst cycle. For 59 minutes and 50 seconds of every hour, it is completely dormant. Less electronic signature than a grain of sand. A ghost hunting a ghost. Then, for 10 seconds, it wakes up, acquires a satellite fix from both GPS and Galileo constellations for redundancy, and transmits its location in a compressed, encrypted burst on a constantly shifting frequency across the 1.2 to 1.6 gigahertz L-band spectrum. By the time any hostile listening post could even register the signal and attempt a triangulation, it's gone again. Vanished. And the power source? How long does it last? Ari asked, circling the display, impressed despite himself. That's the beauty of it. It lasts as long as he does. Gad grinned, a flicker of pure genius in his eyes. There's no battery, or rather, no conventional battery. It has a microcapacitor charged by a piezoelectric kinetic induction coil. Every single step he takes, the movement of the prosthetics pylon, the compression of the carbon fiber foot, the flexion of the knee joint. It all generates a tiny electrical charge that feeds the capacitor. The more he walks, the more power we have. If he stays perfectly still for a week, it might go dark. But our ghost is never still for long. The plan was solidifying into a complex, multinational operation. A Mossad logistics team in Hamburg was tasked with intercepting the shipment from the Stuttgart manufacturer to Beirut. They wouldn't steal it. That would raise immediate alarms with both the company and Al-Jamil. They would perform a swap, a sleight of hand on an international scale. They had obtained the schematics for the exact model Al-Jamil used, an Autobach C-Leg 4, a microprocessor-controlled marvel. Their task was to create a perfect, factory-identical duplicate, indistinguishable in weight, balance, function, and even the faint antiseptic scent of the packaging. And inside the carbon fiber shell of this duplicate, nestled deep within the resin and polymers near the central titanium pylon, they would embed the Might. The Hamburg operation was a ballet of meticulous precision. The logistics team, operating out of a rented warehouse in the sprawling port district, under the cover of a maritime import-export firm called Bremer Transglobal, tracked the crate from the moment it left the Autobach factory. The team leader, a formidable woman named Rivka, who was a former watchmaker and possessed hands as steady as a surgeon's, oversaw the bribe. They targeted a mid-level shipping clerk, a man with a gambling problem and 2 kids in university, to have the crate accidentally misrouted for a 24-hour customs inspection delay. In that narrow, critical window, they got their hands on it. Under the harsh, shadowless glare of intense floodlights, technicians in sterile, clean suits swarmed the crate. They didn't just break it open. They documented, photographed, and measured every staple, every splinter of wood, every packing label, so they could reseal it perfectly. The genuine leg was placed on a scanner, its every curve and contour mapped by lasers to a sub-millimeter tolerance. This data was fed to a high-precision 3D printer and a CNC machine that immediately began fabricating the housing for the duplicate from a block of medical-grade composite. Another team worked feverishly on the electronics. Al-Jamil's sea leg was a symphony of technology, with an array of gyroscopes and angle sensors that adjusted the hydraulic swing phase 50 times a second to create a smooth, natural gait. The duplicate had to replicate this perfectly. They couldn't risk him noticing a subtle change in gait, a fraction of a second's delay in the knee's response to pressure. That kind of anomaly would scream trap to a man whose life depended on noticing the imperceptible. The most delicate part was Rivka's. Using a diamond-tipped dental drill, she carved a minuscule cavity inside the main structural pylon. She placed the mite inside with magnetized tweezers, secured it with a single drop of acoustically neutral epoxy, and then sealed the cavity with a composite dust that was chemically identical to the surrounding material. She then used a portable X-ray fluorescence scanner to check their work. On the screen, the pylon looked solid, a homogeneous piece of metal and carbon. The mite was invisible, shielded by layers of titanium and polymer. It was a ship in a bottle, a secret hidden in plain sight. They reassembled the leg, tested the microprocessor and hydraulics 100 times, and matched the weight to the original down to the gram. They packed it back into the original crate, using the same staples in the exact same holes. 23 hours after it arrived, the crate was back in the shipping lane, its customs delay logged and forgotten. No one was the wiser. Now, the agonizing wait began. Days bled into a week, then 2. Ari, stationed in a nondescript safehouse in Larnaca, Cyprus, a short flight from Beirut, felt the familiar acid churn of operational anxiety. Every nightmare scenario played out on a loop in his mind. What if Al-Jamil decided to use a different clinic? What if Haddad lost his nerve, took his daughter and fled? What if the ghost, with his preternatural paranoia, simply sensed something was wrong with the leg? A shift in the universe only he could perceive. The signal came on a Tuesday morning, a coded message routed through 3 different digital cutouts and appearing as a classified ad in an online newspaper. Lost Nightingale sings beautifully. Reward offered. It was the pre-arranged signal. Haddad had made the call, citing concerns about socket degradation. Al-Jamil had agreed. The appointment was set for Thursday. The day of the fitting was suffocatingly hot in Beirut, the air thick with humidity and exhaust fumes. Ari was not in the city. He was in a mobile command post, a converted delivery van parked a dozen blocks from Haddad's clinic, filled with screens and humming communications gear. The van smelled of hot electronics, nervous sweat, and lukewarm coffee. He had a direct, encrypted audio link to a micro camera disguised as a pen on Haddad's desk and a bug, no bigger than a pinhead, woven into the collar of the doctor's lab coat. He could see and hear everything. Haddad's clinic was on the 2nd floor of a modern glass and steel building. At precisely 2 p.m., a black Mercedes S-Class sedan with tinted windows pulled up. 2 men got out first, their movements economical and professional. They scanned the street, the rooftops, the windows of the adjacent buildings. They were pros. Then, the rear door opened, and Omar Al-Jamil stepped out. He moved with a fluid, almost imperceptible limp, a testament to the quality of his German-made leg and his own iron self-control. He was of medium height, with a neatly trimmed beard and dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to absorb all the light around them. He looked more like a university professor than a mass murderer. The team in the van held its breath as Al-Jamil and his bodyguards entered the building. The audio feed crackled to life. Ari could hear the soft chime of the clinic's door, followed by Haddad's nervously polite greeting. "Mr. Salim." Haddad's voice was tight, stretched thin, but he was holding it together. "Please, come in." "Doctor?" Al-Jamil's voice was smooth, cultured, with a faint accent that was hard to place. "You said on the phone there was an issue with the socket liner?" "A precaution," Haddad said, his voice gaining a little professional confidence as he led his patient to the examination room. "There's a new gel compound I'd like to use, and it offers better pressure distribution. And the new leg you ordered has arrived. The technology is a significant step up. Much better battery life on the microprocessor, a more intuitive swing phase." One of the bodyguards stayed by the door to the outer office, a silent sentinel. The other followed Al-Jamil into the room, his eyes sweeping over every piece of equipment, every cabinet, every window. Ari's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the moment of maximum danger. "Remove your trousers, please," Haddad instructed, his back to the camera as he laid out his tools on a sterile tray. Al-Jamil sat on the examination table. He unstrapped the old prosthesis and, with a practiced, efficient movement, detached it from the stump of his residual limb. For a moment, he was exposed, vulnerable. The bodyguard tensed, his hand instinctively moving to the bulge under his jacket, where he no doubt kept a Glock 19. Haddad picked up the new leg. From Ari's vantage point on the screen, it was identical to the old one, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Let's see the fit." He knelt before the terrorist, the man who had orphaned children and widowed wives, the man who had haunted Ari's every waking thought for 3 years. And Dr. Elias Haddad, the reluctant asset, the terrified father, was holding the key to his destruction in his hands. "The alignment feels good," Al-Jamil noted, as Haddad attached the new limb, the locking mechanism clicking softly into place. "Is the weight the same?" "Precisely," Haddad said, his voice miraculously steady. "To the gram. German engineering, you know." Al-Jamil stood up. He took a few steps, rocking back and forth, testing the feel of it. He walked across the small room and back. The bodyguard watched him, and in the van, Ari watched the bodyguard. Every step he took was a wind of the clock, a turn of the key, feeding precious microvolts of power into the mite's capacitor, bringing their ghost one step closer to life. "The response from the knee is faster," Al-Jamil said, a hint of genuine approval in his voice. "Good. Very good." He sat back down, and Haddad made a few minor adjustments to the straps, his face a mask of professional concentration. Ari could hear his ragged, shallow breathing over the audio link. The doctor was performing the role of his life, with his daughter's life as the prize. "Excellent," Al-Jamil finally said, standing up and pulling on his trousers. "Send the bill to the usual address." He and his men left. The clinic door chimed again. The black Mercedes pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the snarled Beirut traffic. In the van, the team was silent for a full minute. Then, the comms tech let out a long, slow breath that seemed to deflate his entire body. "Phase 3 is complete," he whispered, Nightingale is in the nest. Ari leaned his head back against the cool metal wall of the van, the tension draining from him, leaving a cold, hollow emptiness in its place. He keyed his mic. "Dr. Haddad," he said, his voice soft. "Elias, you did well. A flight is booked for you and Layla, tomorrow morning, to Baltimore. Everything is arranged." He could hear a muffled sob from the audio link, the sound of a man who had sold his soul to save his daughter. The price had been paid. Now, it was time to collect. For the next 4 days, the mite was silent. The dot on the map in the command center in Tel Aviv remained fixed on a location in the southern suburbs of Beirut. The ghost was lying low, getting used to his new leg, testing it in the privacy of his safe house. The team waited. The waiting, as always, was the hardest part. They worked in shifts, their eyes glued to the screen, drinking endless cups of bitter, muddy coffee. The silence in the room punctuated only by the clicking of keyboards on the wall of 1,000 eyes. Then, on the 5th day, it happened. At 3:50 local time, the screen flashed. A single encrypted packet of data arrived. A second later, a red dot appeared on the map. The mite had sent its first burst transmission from a new location. An hour later, precisely on schedule, a second burst followed. The dot was moving. It was heading east, away from the city, towards the mountains and the Syrian border, towards the Bekaa Valley. "He's on the move," the analyst announced, her voice cutting through the pre-dawn quiet of the command center. Instantly, the room came alive. Eitan was on the line to the Air Force. A Heron TP drone, one of the massive long-endurance Eitan models, was already being prepped at Ramat David Air Base. Its call sign was Shomer, the watchman. The dot moved steadily, tracing the path of the main highway before turning onto smaller, secondary roads. The burst transmissions came like clockwork, every hour on the hour, painting a slow but steady path into the heart of Hezbollah territory. This was where the ghost felt safe. This was his sanctuary, his nest. By sunrise, Shomer was airborne, climbing to its operational altitude of 40,000 feet over the Mediterranean before turning east. Its powerful electro-optical and synthetic aperture radar systems could read a license plate from 20 miles away. But the Bekaa Valley was a vast, convoluted landscape of hills, valleys, and villages. They needed the mite to get them close. Another burst came in. The dot was stationary now, near a small, unremarkable village called Ain Kfar Zibad. "He stopped," the analyst said. "Location is stable." The coordinates were fed to the drone pilots. "Shomer is on station." The pilot's voice came over the speakers, calm and professional. "Moving to target grid. Commencing visual search." On the main screen, a high-definition video feed appeared, a monochrome God's eye view of the rugged, hilly terrain. The drone's camera swept across the landscape, zooming in on isolated farms and compounds. "We have a possible match," the sensor operator said, his voice quickening. "Isolated farmhouse, 2 kilometers northeast of the village. 2 vehicles matching the description of the Beirut convoy. I see 5 individuals in the courtyard." The camera zoomed in with incredible power. The figures were just thermal shapes against the cooler ground, but one of them walked with a distinct, almost invisible limp. It was him. For the next 12 hours, they watched. They watched as other vehicles arrived. They watched as men got out, men whose faces were captured, digitized, and cross-referenced with intelligence databases in real time. The results started flashing up on a side screen. A senior Hezbollah logistics officer, a known explosives courier from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Two men believed to be Iranian Quds Force technicians, specialists in unconventional weapons. This wasn't just a hideout. It was a summit. Al-Jamil wasn't just resting, he was teaching. He was holding a masterclass in terror for the region's most dangerous players. "This is bigger than just the ghost," Eitan murmured, his eyes fixed on the screen, a fresh cigarette dangling, forgotten, from his lips. The Prime Minister's office was patched in. The decision came down swiftly and without debate. The entire network was the target. The farmhouse was to be neutralized. As dusk fell over the Bekaa Valley, the atmosphere in the command center grew thick with anticipation. Shomer carried 4 Nimrod SR air-to-ground missiles. Laser-guided, precise, and lethally effective. "Target confirmation," the pilot's voice said. "All high-value individuals are inside the main structure. We have a clear thermal signature from the building. No collateral entities detected in the vicinity." Eitan looked at Ari, his expression grim. "Your operation. Your call." Ari thought of the cafe, of the twisted pink metal from the stroller. He thought of Dr. Haddad and his daughter, now safe in a hospital in America, the terrible price of this very moment. He gave a sharp, single nod. Eitan spoke into his microphone, his voice steady. "Shomer, you are weapons free. Execute." "Roger. Weapons free," the pilot replied. "Laser designator is on. Firing one." On the screen, a thin streak of light detached from the drone's wing. It seemed to hang in the air for a moment before plummeting towards the earth. The flight time was 20 seconds. It was the longest 20 seconds of Ari Levinson's life. He watched the tiny farmhouse grow larger in the missile's infrared view. He saw the courtyard, the parked cars, the single olive tree by the well. He saw the roof. The impact was a silent, brilliant flash of white on the screen, the thermal image blooming into a star of pure, incandescent heat. The sound would take over a minute to reach the drone's microphones, but the visual was instantaneous and absolute. The farmhouse, and everyone in it, ceased to exist. "Direct hit," the pilot reported, his voice devoid of emotion. "Target destroyed. Repeat, target is destroyed." A wave of quiet, exhausted relief washed through the command center. Muted handshakes were exchanged. The ghost was gone. His network was shattered. Operation Nightingale was a success. 2 months later, Ari was sitting on the balcony of his small Tel Aviv apartment, staring out at the dark, placid sea. When his secure phone buzzed, it was Eitan. "Our friends in the north sent a special forces team through the rubble," he said, without preamble. "They found what was left of him, or rather, what was left of the leg." "And?" Ari asked, his stomach tightening. The mite was still there. "Melted slag, but the core housing survived the blast and the fire. Gad's team is taking it apart. But that's not why I'm calling. They found something else in the basement. Something the missile didn't detonate. Not just hexamine and peroxide. They found lead shielding, thick plates of it. They found canisters of cesium-137. Ari felt a cold dread creep up his spine, colder than any winter wind off the sea. Cesium-137, a highly radioactive isotope. The key ingredient for a radiological dispersal device, a dirty bomb. The meeting wasn't just a class. Eitan's voice was grim, stripped of any victory. It was a final assembly, a dry run. Intelligence pieced together from the other target's chatter confirms it. They were planning to detonate a dirty bomb. Not in a cafe, in the Tel Aviv Central Bus Station during evening rush hour. The death toll from the blast would have been in the hundreds. But the panic, the radioactive contamination, the city becoming a ghost town for decades, it would have been unimaginable. a wound from which we would never recover. Ari closed his eyes, the sound of the gentle waves below suddenly seeming loud and violent. They hadn't just stopped a bomb maker. They had stopped a nuclear-level catastrophe. The haunted Katza, the terrified doctor, the ghost with a limp, and a tiny tracker the size of a grain of rice, powered by the footsteps of the very man it was built to destroy. It all clicked into place. The final, horrifying truth of the mission. The ghost they had been hunting wasn't just a killer. He was on the verge of becoming an apocalypse. And no one would ever know how close they had come, or the impossible, invisible chain of events that had pulled them back from the brink. The nightingale had sung its song, and in the profound silence that followed, a city, a nation, continued to breathe, utterly oblivious to the ghost that had almost claimed its soul.